In his diary for the 6th of June 1944, Adrian Ryan wrote one word: invasion, referring to D-Day and the entire Allied operations. He didn't waste words on tumultuous events even at the age of 23. On the 25th of June, his diary records Constantine Cottage at last, where the tranquillity of Cornwall took the place of London's surprisingly busy art world for the rest of the summer. Peggy and their 1-year-old daughter Geraldine came too. On the 3rd of July, his mother Kit arrived from Sussex, and on the 4th and 5th he wrote paint with repeated and unusual emphasis. Kit's visit was difficult. She watched Adrian fervently painting and, disregarding the bravery of his commended fire-watching, she erupted into calling him "you yellow-bellied little toad." This insult he never forgot, although he must have searched inwardly for some understanding of their impossible connection. After Kit left on the 12th of July, and without his permission, she sold Adrian's green Bentley for £5 for the war effort. Wrote to Mother is his sole diary entry for the 26th of July.
I want to ask you to get to the bottom of this betrayal.
There's so much betrayal in Adrian's life because in order to start looking at the betrayal that he experienced with Lucian, we must look at Adrian's childhood and the extraordinary levels of betrayal that show on his birth chart, because his mother was such a capricious and quite frustrated, difficult, spiteful woman that I think probably from his very earliest months on earth, he actually began to know that he couldn't trust her, and that there would be an almost daily betrayal of her care for him, which, as we know, as he got older, became more and more apparent in the way that she spoke to him. And his father, who I think he felt a lot of sympathy for because his poor father was unable to speak or hear properly, betrayed him in the sense that he didn't interfere between him and his mother. So he never gave Adrian a male point of view that would allow him to stand up to his mum.
To this period that we're talking about in the summer of 44.
When he experiences, first of all, again from his mother, I think, because Kit now shows herself off as the arch betrayer by accusing him of being a yellow-bellied little toad, which it's hard to imagine a mother's care being expressed thus. And then also, as you've said, selling his Bentley for a £5, very aggressive, hostile act. What was not apparent, I think, for her was any way out of her rage and frustration at her life, and wanting Adrian to be her knight consort, her rescuer, and his utter refusal to do that. So I think Adrian was already predisposed to experiencing betrayal. Adrian would have looked for new ways of exploring betrayal with his predisposition in order to see whether he could change things, whether he could make it better, whether he could find somebody who would be there for him, who wouldn't let him down. Although letting him down is actually a paltry way of describing Kit's capricious hostility. But I think Adrian was looking, as we all do as human beings, for new ways of experiencing childhood trauma. and to make it better.
So in terms of the Trinity, the agency of Johnny is quite important for positioning themselves. Adrian, the two main protagonists, Lucian and Adrian, are positioning themselves with Johnny as the enabler.
I think that's true, because with Johnny around, if I look at a chart for the three of them together, there's a great pleasure there at enjoying each other's company, but there's also a tremendous fear of anybody within the three showing any need or fear or hunger for more intimate connection than they're able. And then when Johnny's gone, and I did another chart for the combination, if you like, of Adrian and Lucian, which wasn't entirely accurate, because the only accurate birth time I have here is for Adrian. But it was enough to tell me that there's a very deep love between Adrian and Lucian, which is very scary for both of them, because if there's love, then there's fear of loss and fear of control. And they both made such an issue in their lives of avoiding difficult and intimate feelings. Terror that they must have lived in when the thought of potential discovery of their sexuality, which would have finished them off really, they had to be secret. And having already been secret for so much of their lives in terms of hiding their feelings, this was a whole extra layer of what would we describe it as? Well, it's not a closet. To my mind, it's very definitely a very dark cellar.
So what would you say to the people who would say, well, there's no evidence for this other than what has already been spoken of by people who were alive and directly or indirectly, like David Tyndall, concerned? What would you say to the people who say, well, how do you know this?
I know it for myself. I know it through astrology, because by looking at their birth charts, and the birth chart is erected. Here's a birth chart for Adrian. The birth chart is erected as a map of the time, date, and place of somebody's birth, and from my work, it shows the mapping out of a life from birth, infancy, through maturity, relationships with each other, relationships with parents, ability. Their extraordinary skills are also on here, but what we're looking at now is the distress. I think the only way that Lucian could deal with Adrian, particularly after he'd left him by dying, was to find ways of diminishing Adrian's potency so that he could make Adrian a small thing that could be kicked aside. Poor Lucian had a really wretched start. And I think that he needed enormously just to hold himself inviolate, so that nobody could reach him and cause any more damage.
He had this thing that he wouldn't give out his telephone number.
The main thing on for Adrian at that time is his tremendous need to be left alone and to paint, as he says in the diary, paint, 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 paint. He isn't of a mind during that period to have to socialize, even with somebody he cares about. I think he just very desperately needed to be left alone, to work. That was the overriding feeling at that time. And I think that he was finding at that time a new way of experiencing and exploring his work. And he just wanted everyone really to leave him alone.